Hi everyone, this will be part 22 of the Frogger mini-series, and in this video we'll be creating the pause menu, adding the life counter to our HUD, and fixing a bug we accidentally created in the previous video. Let's not waste any time and just jump right into it. Alright, so let's first demonstrate the bug. To do that, we're going to go into the blueprints folder, we'll open up the player, and you don't have to follow along with this part. Actually, I did lie, we're going to open up the game manager. And we're going to change the total time. Right now it's 120 seconds. Let's actually set that to be like 1 second. So let's compile, save, and if we play, we'll just wait a few seconds. And then if we actually fire the game, you can kind of see that the camera was already moving, and in the top right left or top left corner, it already said game over. The player was actually dying in the title screen. So it wasn't really an issue before because we had a long timer, 120 seconds. So as long as the player pressed fire before then, the timer would get reset. But let's go ahead and actually set up the logic to prevent that from happening in the first place. So we'll set the total time back to be 120 seconds. Actually, we'll set it to 1 second for a little bit. That way we can test it out again. And then what we're going to do is in the game manager blueprint, on the event begin play, we're creating a couple widgets, we're storing them as references, and then we're basically resetting the timer, we're starting the function, and then we're storing that function timer in case we need to pause it. So let's just go ahead and break that connection. And what we can do is we'll grab this bottom half, and we'll just drag it down and give us a little bit of space. And we'll create our own custom event. So we'll add a custom event, and we'll just call it start game timer. Nothing too fancy. And then what we can do is we'll select this back half here, move it down here. Because the logic I think is still fine. I mean, there's a few ways we could engineer and tackle this, but I think this is probably the most elegant that I can think of anyways. So we'll just create its own custom event, and then we just need to call this from the fire event on the main menu, and we're doing that from the player blueprint. So we can actually come over here, and then I think in the last video we created an enhanced input action called IA_fire, which checks if the game is not already started. If it's not, it sets that variable to started, it plays the widget fade out, it waits 4 seconds, it removes the title screen widget completely from the screen, and then blends the camera from the title screen camera to the player camera, and then it resets the timer. So we no longer need this, so we can actually delete that there. And instead, we can use our game manager reference, pull off and call the start game timer, because if you remember, the start game timer has the reset timer in it. So it's kind of like an all-in-one. So this will basically do the same thing, and it'll also prevent the game from kicking off in the title screen. So we'll drag that here, and that's basically the only code changes we kind of need to make to fix this bug. At least I think so. If we play, now every 1 second, the player should be dying. So well, I think we only have 3 lives, so that should be long enough. If you press fire, you'll notice we are still on the title screen camera. We should kick over the player, the timer begins, and now we're dying because it's only 1 second. So there's 2, and then there's 3, and then it should say game over. So that is actually working. It's just that our game timer is currently set to 1 second. So we'll go back to total time. We'll set that to be 120 seconds to be a little bit more realistic. And now that should work just fine. Now let's go ahead and add our life counter to the HUD. So I think that'll be, since we're dealing with decrementing the lives, we might as well add that in now. So we can go to the widgets screen, and we need some way to track the lives. So I made a quick doodle. So I can basically just drag this over as an import. I'll make this available in the Gumroad page as well, but you can use any doodle, any PNG file for your image. So if you want to use something different, that's fine too. And then I will open up the heads-up display. And we simply need to add in an image. So we'll add an image file here. We'll do size to content, and then for the brush, that's actually where we choose the image, and I think I called it life counter. So there's a little frog. It's a little too big, so I'm going to dumb him down or scale him down, which I think I can do on image size, so I'll do 75 by 75. I think that's probably good enough. Then we go to anchors, we'll pop them bottom left corner, hold control, go back, hold shift, and then we can simply add an offset. So for the time offset, we were doing -100 in the Y, so we can try to match that, -100. And then in the X, we'll just bump it over. Maybe just a smidge, and I don't like -100, so I'm actually going to move it, maybe somewhere right around there. So we'll do -75, and we'll do maybe 55. And I think that looks fine. Now we're going to add in a text element, and this text element is simply just going to be an X, like so, and we will anchor it bottom left, hold control, hold shift, and then we'll just add in an offset. And I'm actually going to try that -100, and then I'll move it over, see how this looks. Maybe right about there, and I don't like it, so let's move it right there. Yeah, I think that works. So we'll do -94, and then we'll do 130. All right, then last but not least is we add one final text element. This one's going to be a little different because this is going to be our life counter. So we'll call this life total, or we'll just call it life counter. Why not? I don't think that'll be an issue. But the important part is we check the box for is variable. That way we can dynamically set it. So for the lives, let's go ahead and put in 99 so we know there's an issue, and then we'll check it to size the content. We'll anchor it in the bottom left corner, and we'll hold control, hold shift, and then in the Y, -100 to start, and then we'll kick it over. And this one, I'm gonna make a little bit bigger, I think. So maybe 48, that way it kind of stands out. And then maybe we bump that right there. So we'll do -75 and 164, I think is all right. And what we'll do is we will set this value to 3, or whatever our life counter is going to be for the level, programmatically. So if it says 99, we know there's an issue because our code isn't working. But yeah, that's good so far. So we can compile and save. And this is going to be our basic HUD. So now we can come to the graph view of this. And we just need to add in, we don't really need to do anything on construction because we're going to pass that in from the game manager. So there's really no need. So we'll just create a custom event. We'll call it update lives. And then on it, we can add an input. The input is going to be the life total. And then we'll just set that to be an integer. And you have to match whatever your game manager data type is, which I believe we set to be an integer. We'll find out in a second. And then all we have to do is we have our life counter variable now. We can hold control, drag that out, much like we did before. Pull off and do a set text. And then we just pass in the integer value. It'll call the conversion function and then hook up the execution pins like so. And that is it. That's the entirety of this function. So that works pretty good for what we'll need it to do. So now to actually make this work, remember our game manager is controlling a lot of that logic. So we need to find the begin play. And after we create the HUD elements, we have our HUD reference. We can pull off right there and target that custom event we just made, which was update lives. So we could say call the update lives function, and we will pass in our integer that we created in an earlier video called our total lives, which right now set to 3. So we'll just pass this over here. And there's one other area we need to call this function. If you think about it, you can probably figure it out. It's when we lose a life, right? When we decrement a life, we want to update the HUD to have the new life total. So we're doing that in another custom event called lost life. So from here, we can basically grab our HUD reference, hold Control, drag it out, and we'll kind of pull this out over here. I think that's all right. And then we'll pull off this and do a update lives. We'll hook up the execution pins like so. And then we can just pass in this new life total, which will come from this pin here into here, because it basically decrements it first, and then that's the new value. We're also checking for our game over condition as well, but you know, we can basically use that here. So just remember there's two areas, and there's one in the lost life and there's one in the event begin play. So hopefully that makes sense. So now we can compile and save. And if we play this, see if our element shows up. It does, and it doesn't have 99, it has a 3. So now when we, oh my god, there we go. So now you see it says 2. And if I go get hit again, now we got 1. And this is our last life. This will hit 0 and call the game over in the top left corner. So there we go. So that's basically our life situation all set. But the other thing we want to do is we want to be able to pause the game. We haven't set that up. We have it on our title screen, so when we play, we're saying press P to pause, right? So let's actually engineer that. Pause screens are actually pretty easy, at least the ones that I make. So I'll show you a quick and dirty way to do it. We can just go to our widgets, we'll right click, select user interface, and do new widget blueprint. And we'll select user widget, we'll call it WBP_pause. Double click to open that up, or press enter. And then we will do what we normally do, where we add a canvas panel in. And then what we can do, normally I do this in a certain order. You would next add your blur background, but to show you what this is doing a little bit easier, I will add my text field first. So we'll basically add text. I'm going to center that screen, hold Control, hold Shift, size the content, and I'm going to say paused. It's a little small, so bump it up, and I think we'll use our fancy pixel font. I think it looks kind of cool. And we'll just maybe set it there. I think that looks pretty neat. And then let's add in the blur background. So we'll add that on here. And then we'll hold anchors. We're going to do full screen and then go back and hold Control. So it sets it to a full screen. And then for your blur strength, I think 4 is probably a good amount. But you'll notice it blurs the pause screen, and that has to do with the order that we added them to the canvas panel. You can, of course, just add your blur screen first and then your HUD elements after. That'll fix it. Or you can adjust your Z order. So you can give the blur background a lower value than your text. So we can make the Z order on the text 1, or we can just make the Z order on the blur background -1. So it goes behind. It'll still blur everything behind it. So there's a number of different ways you can tackle that. And that's kind of it for that, really. So there's not most of the function for the pause screen is going to be controlled through the enhanced input system and basically your key bindings. So we'll save that widget for now, and let's go ahead and go into our input folder, and we're going to create a new input action. So we'll select input action, call it IA_pause. And then there is something we need to change in the input action. There is a type that says trigger when paused. Basically, in a pause state, the game doesn't do anything. It kind of freezes everything in place. So if you don't want to lock yourself out of your game, you want to be able to set certain events to be able to still function or tick, basically. So they'll usually have these little check marks saying, hey, you can call this when you're in a pause state. So that's what we'll set for that. That looks good. And then we, of course, need to add this action to our input mapping context. So we'll double click here. And then we will simply add in a new input action. We'll select our IA_pause. And then we just have to assign a key. So keyboard, I'll make it easy. I'll just use the P key. If you're using a controller, like a gamepad, you can select gamepad, and I think it's the special right or special left buttons. So one of those should be good. And then we can save that for the IMC. And now we basically just need to figure out how we're going to call and store this widget. So we can probably get away with doing this instead of doing it on the game manager. I think it makes more sense to do it on the player blueprint. But you could technically do it in either one. You could technically do it on the level blueprint if you wanted to. You can get really weird with it. But what we'll do is we will find the event begin play. And then I think what we'll do is I'm going to move all this back. This is the logic for our title screen. So what we'll do is we will create a widget. We're going to create that pause screen. And this simply creates it. It doesn't put it on the screen. So we can right click and promote it and store it as a pause screen reference. So we can actually use this kind of later. All right, so now that we have this event stored, what we can do is, like we did before, we created the IA_fire. So let's do IA_pause. And we'll actually hit the drop down. I'm going to show you what it looks like on a triggered state. We're going to pull into a print string, and we'll just have it say hello. So it's important to know the difference between triggered, started, ongoing, canceled, completed, because they're going to function differently. So if I start my game here, now I put it on the P key. So if I push the P key once, you'll notice in the top left corner, it didn't call it once. It called it, what, 7 times? And then if I hold it down, it basically, so it's based on your keyboard, like how fast it can actuate or trigger. So doing on the triggered is basically going to add and remove the pause screen, multiple times if we were to set it up that way. So that's not going to give us the logic we want. Let's see what started looks like. So we'll compile that, and we'll start the game. And then if I push the P key, you notice I only get 1. So that's exactly what we want. So when the player basically just presses it once, we want to call that action. So we want to do the started event. And then ongoing is basically, well, as long as you're holding it down, you can also set thresholds for that. And then cancel is if, I guess, you cancel an input. Like you do with certain, like Elden Ring would probably be a good example. You can like try to get out of certain animations or certain like attacks. Sometimes they still eat the input though, but there's, some advanced settings you can do on the input systems on the action to prevent that. And then completed is when the player releases their finger from the key or lets go of the button on the controller. So we'll delete the print string because we no longer need it. And we will instead come into a flip-flop. Flip-flop basically calls A, and the next time it's called, it calls B. So it makes it very good for this type of setup. Now we can grab our pause reference. We need 2 of them. And then we're basically going to be adding to viewport under 1. And we're going to be removing from viewport, or I'm sorry, removing from parent, which is like remove from viewport on the other. And then we will hook up the execution pins, and then of course this just adds the widget. It doesn't actually pause the game. So like if I push P, you see the game still going even though I have the pause screen, right? I can still move around and do everything. This basically just puts the widget on the screen. That's it. Layers it on. So to pause the game, what you want to do is call in what's the function set game paused. And then we'll do that for here too, set game paused. And then for the top one, we'll check the box. For the bottom one, we will leave it unchecked. And because this custom event is able to be called in a pause state, we can flip-flop on and off here. So now that we have that set up, we can go ahead and play this prototype. Let's see what this looks like. Let's see, I paused that. That worked. Then I'm holding input and trying to move. So I basically have to unpause the screen for the actions to still go through. And that is a simple pause menu. All right, good people, I think we'll cut it here, but in the next one, we'll focus our attention on the Game Over widget for this project. As always, thanks for watching, consider subscribing, and we'll see you on the next one.